The galactic concord of sentient species had existed for 12,000 years, before humanity stumbled onto the interstellar scene, with all the grace of a toddler, discovering its own reflection, which is to say with excessive noise boundless enthusiasm, and a complete inability to comprehend what they were actually looking at. The Concorde itself was housed in an architectural marvel, a massive ring station, orbiting a perfectly unremarkable star in the perfectly unremarkable DR system. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone's centrality, without privilege balance, without favoritism and equality, without exception at least. That was the official line in the brochures handed out to tourists and new diplomatic attaché. Reality, as with most things involving politics and self-important beings in expensive attire, was substantially more complicated. Another human request for expanded mining rights in the Orion Spur Psi. High Counselor Zral, a being composed primarily of crystalline structures that refracted light in patterns that served as their species' equivalent of facial expressions. Currently, those patterns suggested profound exasperation. That's the fourth this cycle, replied Under Secretary Klept, whose gelatinous form rippled with what might have been amusement. You have to admire their persistence. I admire a well-aged fermentation culture, Under Secretary. What I feel toward humans is something rather different. The two officials floated through the grand corridor, leading to the Concorde's primary assembly chamber, where representatives from over 300 species gathered to debate matters of galactic importance, or more accurately, to engage in the fine art of making simple matters incomprehensibly complex through the application of procedure precedent and petty grievances dating back millennia. Humanity had been part of this august body for precisely 37 standard years in cosmic terms. This made them practically embryonic in diplomatic terms. It made them the equivalent of distant relatives who show up uninvited to family gatherings and immediately start suggesting improvements to traditions. They barely understand. The human delegation occupied a modestly sized office in what was diplomatically referred to as the Emerging Interests Wing, but was more commonly known as the Noisy Neighbors Nook. Their chief representative was a specimen who called himself Ambassador Jackson, though whether this was a designation, a lineage marker, or some form of honorific, remained unclear to many species. Ambassador Jackson was currently engaged in what humans called coffee, but what most other species recognized as voluntary mild poisoning for stimulant purposes. The practice alone had earned humans a reputation for recreational toxin consumption that both confused and disturbed many members of the Concorde. Ambassador, the delegation from Proxima Centaur has lodged another formal complaint about your staff's auditory communications, said the ambassador's aide, a fresh-faced diplomatic corps graduate who still believed in the power of reasoned discourse. You mean they're bitching about us? Laughing again. Jackson didn't look up from the report. He was reading a detailed analysis of resource allocation in the Parius arm that most species found mind-numbingly dull, but that humans seemed to read with the enthusiasm normally reserved for illicit entertainment. They specifically mentioned the barking vocalizations that disturb psychic equilibrium during yesterday's reception. Jackson finally looked up, taking another sip of his coffee. Tell them we're working on modulating our expressions of mirth to accommodate their delicate sensibilities. Use exactly those words. The aide winced. Sir, the translation matrices will. I know exactly what they'll do, kid. That's the point. This exchange, typical of human diplomatic operations, exemplified precisely why the older species found humanity so baffling. They seemed to deliberately antagonize, while simultaneously pursuing serious diplomatic objectives. They submitted meticulously researched proposals with one hand, while making what they called jokes with the other. The resulting cognitive dissonance had caused more than one Methus Allen to temporarily lose control. The current diplomatic incident, the one that would ultimately reveal humanity's true nature to the galaxy, began, as these things often do, with something utterly trivial. In this case, a dispute over proper seating arrangements at the upcoming quincentennial Harmony Gala. Absolutely unacceptable, hissed Representative S. Slen of the Adian meritocracy, their forked tongue flicking rapidly in agitation. The human delegation cannot be seated in Sector 7. The pheromones they emit will contaminate our taste receptors for the entire event. Perhaps the Ophidians would prefer to be seated in the service corridors, suggested Ambassador Jackson. With a smile that somehow managed to display far too many teeth, I hear the ambient temperature there is perfect for cold-blooded deliberations. The Gala Organizational Committee, composed of 7 species chosen for their legendary patience and diplomatic finesse, collectively exhibited sign of extreme stress. The Cubalan representative was actively molting, if I may interjected the Arcturian mediator, whose species had evolved specifically to detect and diffuse tension between other life forms. Perhaps we could consider a compromise that acknowledges both biological necessities and diplomatic courtesies. What followed was 4 hours of discussion about a seating chart. Meanwhile, in the service corridors, that Ambassador Jackson had so casually mentioned, a far more significant conversation was taking place. The weapon shipment has cleared customs on 3 separate worlds, using the diplomatic tags, reported a human operative to their superior. Neither wore official embassy insignia. The cell never suspected they were being tracked, and the surveillance data asked the superior, a compact human with eyes that never seemed to blink at the rate most species found normal. Comprehensive weave identified 12 major distribution nodes and 4 primary financial controllers. The enforcement division will have everything they need to decapitate the entire organization. The superior nodded. Excellent. The ambassador will announce our findings at tomorrow's Security Council meeting. The timing should align perfectly with the coordinated raids. This operation, meticulously planned, flawlessly executed, and conducted entirely without the knowledge of the Galactic Concord's vaunted security apparatus, was the culmination of months of work by the Human Intelligence Services. The target, a cross-species criminal enterprise responsible for trafficking in illegal technology, endangered biological materials, and sentient beings. The irony that humans were using a dispute about seating arrangements as cover for an operation of this magnitude was precisely the sort of thing that humans found hilarious and other species would soon find terrifying, because while the galactic community saw humans as pushy, loud, and diplomatically inexperienced, they had fundamentally misunderstood what they were dealing with. They saw the diplomatic awkwardness, the cultural faux power, the strange insistence on consuming caffeine in public settings. What they failed to see was the predator's gaze behind the smile. The next day, as Ambassador Jackson prepared his notes for the Security Council meeting, his aide approached with news. Sir, we've just received word that the Ophidians have formally requested your removal from the Harmony Gala. Jackson looked up, that same toothy smile spreading across his face. Perfect timing. Have our response ready, but don't send it until after the council meeting. I suspect priorities may shift rather dramatically by then. The aide, still learning the subtleties of human diplomatic practice, nodded uncertainly, and the response should be gracious acceptance of their concerns, profound apologies for any misunderstanding, and sincere hopes for continued cooperation in matters of mutual interest. Jackson's smile didn't waver. After all, we're just here to be good neighbors. As he gathered his materials and prepared to unleash chaos upon the criminal organization that had eluded the Concord's justice for decades, Ambassador Jackson hummed a cheerful tune. The galaxy was about to learn something fundamental about humans, something beyond their strange customs and baffling diplomatic approaches. They were about to learn what happens when the apex predator drops the act. The Security Council of the Galactic Concord consisted of representatives from the 9 most militarily significant powers, plus 2 rotating members chosen by lottery, a system designed to give the appearance of egalitarianism, while ensuring that those with the biggest guns remained perpetually in charge. Democracy in space turned out to be remarkably similar to democracy on Earth, a beautiful ideal frequently corrupted by practical considerations. Humans had earned their seat through what the diplomatic corps officially termed rapid infrastructural development, but what was in reality the fastest military expansion in recorded galactic history. This had caused considerable concern among the established powers, but since humans had thus far limited themselves to defensive posturing and escort duties for humanitarian missions, the anxiety had gradually subsided into a sort of patronizing tolerance. Ambassador Jackson, you've requested emergency speaking privileges, intoned High Marshal Gulick of the Volter Dominion, a species that had evolved from apex avian predators and still retained the sharpened intensity of their ancestors. The council recognizes Earth's representative Jackson stood straightening the perfectly tailored suit that humans insisted on wearing despite the availability of far more comfortable and technologically advanced attire. The human obsession with cloth wrappings remained a source of bewilderment among most species' distinguished representatives. He began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a seasoned diplomat. I come before you today with information of grave concern to all law-abiding members of our galactic community. What followed was a masterclass in controlled revelation. With methodical precision, Jackson laid out evidence of the criminal enterprise that human intelligence services had been tracking: financial records, transport manifests, surveillance footage, and intercepted communications. The presentation was thorough, professional, and utterly damning. In conclusion, Jackson said, after 30 minutes of increasingly shocking revelations, we have identified the key leadership of this organization, their primary bases of operation, and their immediate plans for expansion. Earth stands ready to assist in bringing these criminals to justice. The council chamber fell into stunned silence. The Methus Allen representative's skin had turned a pale blue, a sign of extreme shock in their species. The Vaulter High Marshal's feathers were fully erect, signaling heightened alertness. High Counselor XTR's crystalline form had darkened considerably. Ambassador Jackson, are you telling this council that human intelligence services conducted unauthorized operations across multiple jurisdictions without informing the Security Directorate? Jackson's expression didn't change. We conducted a thorough investigation using our diplomatic prerogatives and the freedom of movement accorded to all member species. We broke no laws. This is unprecedented. Hiss, the Adian representative. The humans have overstepped their authority. Such investigations are the purview of the Security Directorate, the same Security Directorate that has failed to make any progress against this organization for the past 17 years. Jackson's smile was thin. We achieved in months what you couldn't in decades. Perhaps, instead of questioning our methods, you should be questioning your own effectiveness. The chamber erupted in overlapping vocalizations, electromagnetic pulses, and pheromone releases, the multi-species equivalent of shouting. And that's when the emergency alert system activated. Red lights pulsed along the walls of the chamber as the AI system announced security breach, detected unknown vessels approaching central platform, weapon signatures, detected all personnel to emergency stations. The council members froze, their dispute instantly forgotten. Display tactical feed, ordered High Marshal Gulick. The central holographic projector flickered to life, showing 12 vessels approaching the Concord station. Their design was unfamiliar, a hybrid of technologies from multiple species, exactly the sort of cobbled together but lethal crafts favored by those operating outside legal boundaries. It appears, said Jackson with remarkable calm, that our targets have become aware of our investigation and decided to take preemptive action. The station's defensive systems are activating, reported the Cubalan representative, their appendages flying over the control surfaces, but response time is delayed. They've somehow compromised our command protocols. How is that possible? Demanded High Counselor Zial. The defensive grid is isolated from all external networks. Obviously not isolated enough, replied Jackson. His hand moved to his ear, activating a communication device that none of the aliens had noticed. Jackson, to vigilant tactical situation. Alpha, deploy countermeasures and prepare boarding teams. Authorization. Theta 9 Epsilon. The council members stared at him in confusion. Ambassador, began High Marshal Grand Thix. What are you? The tactical display flashed as 6 new ships suddenly appeared, dropping out of FTL travel with impossible precision, positioning themselves between the attackers and the station. The design was unmistakably human. May I introduce the 7th Rapid Response Fleet, said Jackson, his demeanor shifting. Subtly. Gone was the slightly bumbling diplomat. In his place stood something else entirely, a commander, strategist, a hunter. They've been standing by for this exact scenario. You anticipated this attack. The Methan's skin had shifted to a MT-led purple of confusion. Of course. We leaked information about our investigation precisely to provoke this response. It's much easier to capture them in the ACT than to build a case that would satisfy the Concord's judicial requirements. Jackson spoke as if explaining something obvious to a particularly slow child. We needed them to commit an overt act of aggression against the Concord itself. makes the legal process so much tidier. The council watched in stunned silence as the human vessels executed a series of maneuvers that should have been impossible for ships of their size. They moved with coordinated precision, hurrying the attacking vessels like predators corralling prey. Your defensive paradigm is floored, Jackson continued conversationally, as the battle unfolded on the display you build. Bigger shields, more powerful weapons, and more elaborate detection systems. But you think reactively humans prefer to control the battlefield before the first shot is fired. The first of the attacking vessels attempted to break formation, making a run for open space. A human ship intercepted it within seconds, launching what appeared to be boarding pods that attached to the hull like parasites. Those are our special tactical teams, Jackson explained. What we call Marines. They are particularly good at close-quarters combat. The term dates back to when humans fought wars on water. If you can imagine something so primitive, the casual way he discussed what was clearly a violent boarding action sent ripples of unease through the council. The humans were revealing capabilities that had never been included in their official military assessments. Ambassador, said High Marshal Gulick, struggling to maintain composure. Your actions, while apparently in defense of the Concorde, represent a significant breach of protocol. Military operations must be authorized by this council. Jackson turned to the Avon Marshal, and something in his gaze caused the mighty Valady to take an involuntary step back. With all due respect, Marshal, when someone points a gun at your head, protocol becomes luxury. We acted to save lives. The smile returned, but it no longer reached his eyes. Isn't that what matters most? The preservation of life, of course. But excellent then. I'm sure the council will have no objections to our methods once they've had time to review the results. Speaking of which, he touched his ear again. Status report. The voice that responded was audible to the entire chamber. All hostile vessels contained, sir, minimal casualties on both sides. Prisoners being processed. We've secured their command and control systems and are extracting data. Now, well done, Commander. Maintain position and prepare for Security Directorate handover. Jackson turned back to the council, whose members were displaying various biological signs of shock. As I was saying, Earth stands ready to assist in bringing these criminals to justice. It appears that assistance has already begun. The silence that followed was profound. The galaxy had just witnessed something unexpected. Humans operating not as diplomatic newcomers, but as efficient, ruthless predators who had manipulated events to their advantage from the very beginning. I think, said High Counselor Zix finally, their crystalline form still darkened with shock, that the council will need to reassess several assumptions about our human colleagues. That seems why, agreed Jackson once again. The perfect diplomat, perhaps over refreshments. I understand these sessions can be quite taxing, as he offered this perfectly normal diplomatic nicety, standing amid the aftermath of the ambush he had personally orchestrated. The contrast could not have been more stark. The apex predator had shown its teeth, and then immediately returned to wearing its civilized mask, and that perhaps was the most disturbing revelation of all. The immediate aftermath of what was now being called the Security Council incident spread through the galactic Concorde's diplomatic circles with the speed and destructive potential of a quantum cascade failure. Emergency sessions were called, heated debates erupted, threat assessments were hastily revised, and through it all the human delegation maintained an air of helpful cooperation that somehow managed to be more unsettling than outright hostility. Earth days, 3 days after the incident, the Concorde's executive committee convened in what was officially an information-gathering session, but what everyone understood to be a tribunal in all but name. The humans were on trial not for their actions against the criminal organization which had indeed been responsible for unspeakable crimes, but for the manner in which they had revealed themselves to be something other than what the galaxy had assumed. The committee chamber was smaller than the main assembly hall, designed for 30 representatives at most. Today, it held just 15, the 7-member executive committee, 5 expert witnesses, Ambassador Jackson, and 2 other human diplomatic staff. Let us be clear about what transpired, began Premier Delegate Axon Varric of the Dorsan Technocracy, a being composed of lattice metallic filaments surrounding a plasma core. The Dorsan were among the oldest species in the Concorde, and regarded most other life forms as developmental mali, incomplete human intelligence assets, conducted unauthorized operations across sovereign territories, manipulated a criminal enterprise into attacking the Concorde itself, and deployed military forces without Council approval. Ambassador Jackson, looking remarkably rested for someone at the center of a diplomatic firestorm, nodded pleasantly an accurate summary, though I would suggest that the term unauthorized is open to interpretation under Articles 17 and 29 of the Concorde Charter, which permit member species to pursue investigations related to their own security concerns across jurisdictional boundaries when we are familiar with the Charter. Ambassador interrupted Delegate Axonic. What concerns this committee is not the legality of your actions, but their implication. I'm afraid I don't follow, said Jackson, with a puzzled expression that fooled no one in the chamber. Then allow me to be explicit. The Dorson plasma core, flared bright, a sign of intensifying emotion. Humanity has revealed itself to be far more dangerous than previously assessed. You have demonstrated capabilities beyond what you declared upon joining the Concorde. You have shown a disturbing willingness to manipulate events and other species to achieve your objectives. In short, Ambassador, you have revealed yourselves to be predators, wearing the masks of diplomats. Jackson's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle straightening of the spine, a slight forward tilt of the head. Those species sensitive to micro-expressions recognized the change immediately. The human was dropping pretenses. Premier Delegate Jackson said, his voice devoid of its usual affable quality, every species in this room evolved from predators. The difference is not that humans have a predatory nature. It's that we've never forgotten ours. An uncomfortable ripple moved through the chamber. Furthermore, Jackson continued, I find it curious that we're being questioned about our methods when those methods successfully neutralized a threat that the Concorde's own security apparatus failed to address for nearly 2 decades. One might almost suspect that certain elements within the Concorde preferred that this criminal enterprise remain operational. This is an outrageous insinuation. The Adian representative scales flared in agitation. Is it? Jackson glanced down at his data pad. Because our operations uncovered financial transfers from accounts linked to 3 different council members' private holdings to shell corporations associated with the criminal leadership. We were planning to address this through discreet diplomatic channels, but since we're being so direct today, the chamber erupted in overlapping vocalizations and electromagnetic emissions. Amidst the chaos, the Oxyrian mediator activated their harmonic resonator, sending a wave of calming vibrations through the chamber. Please, colleagues, this confrontational approach serves no one. Perhaps we might redirect the discussion toward constructive outcomes. An excellent suggestion, agreed Jackson, seamlessly shifting back to his diplomatic persona. Earth has prepared a comprehensive report on the criminal organization, including all evidence of official complicity. We are, of course, willing to turn this over to an independent investigative body. The implied threat hung in the air. If you push us, we'll expose everyone involved. The Killian representative, whose species processed information faster than most organic beings, clicked rapidly in their native tongue before the translation matrix converted it to standard. The ambassador's offer seems reasonable. However, this does not address the committee's primary concern regarding humanity's self-presentation within the Concorde. You mean the fact that we didn't announce ourselves as dangerous when we joined? Jackson laughed, a sound that several species found deeply unsettling in the current context. Would any of you have done differently when entering a new environment filled with established predators? Only a fool declares themselves a threat, so you admit to deliberate deception, said the Dorson representative. I admit to prudence, counted Jackson, just as I admit to taking action when the established systems failed, just as I admit to prioritizing results over appearance. These are human traits that serve us well, and they served the Concorde well 3 days ago. He stood now, abandoning protocol, and began to pace slowly before the committee. You're afraid because you've just realized you don't understand us. You built assumptions about humanity based on our technological development stage, our diplomatic inexperience, our apparent eagerness to please. You categorized us, filed us away, and stopped paying attention. His voice remained calm, but there was an intensity to it that commanded attention. That was your mistake on Earth. The creatures that stopped paying attention to humans went extinct. The silence that followed was profound. Even the Aryan mediator seemed at a loss. Finally, the eldest member of the committee, a Tauran whose age was measured in centuries, spoke in the slow, deliberate manner of their kind ambassador. "Are you threatening the Concord?" Jackson stopped pacing, and smiled a genuine expression that somehow managed to be more intimidating than any display of aggression. "Not at all. I'm inviting you to understand us better. Humans don't want conflict. We're actually quite collaborative by nature. But we're also survivors. We prepare for worst-case scenarios. We act decisively when threatened, and yes, when necessary, we hunt." He returned to his seat with casual grace. "The question isn't whether humans are predators disguised as diplomats. The question is whether the Concord prefers having us as allies or adversaries." The weeks following the confrontation with the executive committee witnessed a remarkable shift in galactic politics. The humans, having revealed their predatory capabilities, might have expected isolation or hostility. Instead, they found themselves the recipients of something far more valuable in interstellar relations: respect, tinged with healthy caution. The quincentennial Harmony Gala, the very event whose seating arrangements had sparked the initial diplomatic incident, proceeded as scheduled, though with several notable modifications. The human delegation was no longer relegated to Sector 7, but placed prominently near the central disk. The Adian representatives, who had so vehemently objected to human proximity, now seemed to find their presence not merely tolerable but desirable. Fascinating how quickly perceptions change, isn't it? Observed Under Secretary Klepp to High Counselor Zerao, as they watched Ambassador Jackson chatting amiably with a group of previously standoffish delegates. "One moment they're diplomatic newcomers, the next they're courted allies. Fear is a powerful motivator," replied Zial. "Crystalline structures, refracting light in patterns suggesting deep thought, though I wonder if they realize how transparent their sudden friendliness appears to the humans' eye. Suspect. The humans are counting on exactly that perception." CLB's gelatinous form rippled with what might have been amusement or concern. The distinction was often difficult for non-gelatinous species to discern. They've revealed just enough to make everyone reassess, without showing their full capabilities. A calculated revelation. Then, almost certainly across the grand reception hall, Ambassador Jackson was engaged in what appeared to be pleasant small talk with the vaulter High Marshal. To the casual observer, it was the very picture of diplomatic cordiality. To those with more nuanced understanding of interspecies dynamics, it was a masterclass in subtle dominance assertion. "Your security teams performed admirably during the incident," the High Marshal was saying, head tilted in the avant gesture of acknowledgement. "Such precision in boarding operations is uncommon." "You're too kind," replied Jackson with practiced modesty. "Our Marines train extensively for various scenarios. One never knows when such skills might be needed in our dangerous galaxy." The emphasis on "our dangerous galaxy" was subtle, but unmistakable. It was the verbal equivalent of casually resting one's hand near a weapon, not a threat, but a reminder. "Indeed," agreed the Marshal, feathers slightly raised in what humans had learned to recognize as nervous tension. "The Val Dominion has always valued preparedness. Perhaps our forces might benefit from joint exercises in the future." "What an excellent suggestion," Jackson smiled, displaying just enough teeth to remind the Avon of what humans had evolved from. "I'll have my military attaché contact your office to arrange details." In a far corner of the reception hall, a junior human diplomatic officer was explaining human idioms to a fascinated group of multispecies attaché. "So when we say wolf in sheep's clothing, we're referring to something dangerous disguising itself as harmless," she explained, sipping from a glass of what appeared to be wine, but was in fact a non-alcoholic substitute. Humans had learned early in their diplomatic career that maintaining complete mental clarity was essential in interspecies settings. "And your species identifies with the sheep in this metaphor?" asked Aquilian representative, appendages twitching in confused fusion. The human's laugh caused several nearby beings to startle slightly. No, historically humans were definitely the wolves in most ecosystems, where apex predators who developed intelligence tools and eventually diplomacy. Yet you speak of wolves as separate from yourselves, noted a Methus alien observer. "Cultural compartmentalization," the human replied with a shrug. "We tend to forget our predatory nature until circumstances require us to remember." This casual admission that humans could consciously switch between diplomatic and predatory modes of operation sent a ripple of unease through the gathered attaches. It confirmed what many species were just beginning to understand: humans weren't wolves disguised as sheep. They were wolves who would learn to behave like diplomatic partners when it suited them. The most significant change, however, was evident in the Concord's administrative operations. Investigations into the criminal organization exposed by the humans had expanded, revealing corruption that reached into the highest levels of multiple governments. 3 council members had been forced to resign. The Security Directorate had undergone a complete overhaul of its protocols, and throughout it all the humans offered assistance, expertise, and resources with unfailing politeness. 6 months after the incident, Ambassador Jackson found himself in a private meeting with the newly appointed High Counselor, the Tan Elder, who had asked that pivotal question about whether humans were threatening the Concord. "The reforms you suggested have been implemented," the TED said, their voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Our security protocols are more robust. Our anti-corruption measures more effective. One might observe that the Concord is stronger now than before your revelation." Jackson nodded appreciatively. "That was always our goal, High Counselor. A stable, secure, galactic community benefits everyone, humans included." Indeed, the Tan's ancient eyes studied the human with the patience of a being who had seen civilizations rise and fall. "Though I cannot help but wonder what humanity gains from all this. You've exposed yourselves as more dangerous than previously believed, yet continue to operate within our diplomatic frameworks. Why not simply use your advantages to secure more power?" Jackson's expression softened into something genuine, perhaps the first truly unguarded moment he had allowed himself in an official capacity. "Because that's not sustainable, and humans think long-term. We could seize resources, territory, or influence through force or manipulation. But that creates resistance and resentment. By working within the system, even while demonstrating that we could operate outside it if necessary, we build something more valuable, a community where our children can thrive. Your species is remarkably contradictory," observed the Tauran predators, who prefer peace warriors, who value diplomacy, strategists who seek cooperation rather than dominance. "That's humanity in a nutshell," agreed Jackson with a small smile. "We prepare for the worst while working toward the best. We maintain our fangs and claws while extending open hands. We never forget what we evolve from, even as we strive to become something better." As the meeting concluded and Jackson departed, the Tan remained in contemplation. The galaxy had indeed learned something profound about humanity. Not just that they were apex predators, disguised as diplomats, but that they were apex predators who genuinely preferred diplomatic solutions when available. The distinction was subtle but crucial. Humans hadn't been pretending to value cooperation and stability. They had been entirely sincere about their diplomatic goals. They had merely omitted mentioning what they were capable of when diplomacy failed. And perhaps that was the most important understanding of all. Humans weren't wolves pretending to be something else. They were wolves who had decided that peace was preferable to hunting, but who had never forgotten how to hunt. The galaxy would never make that mistake again.